I wanted to look at some Nietzschean metaphysics, as Heidegger brings out. It's still metaphysics according to him, or possibly it's what's already. Sometimes he does say possibly Nietzsche's already broken from metaphysics in some way. To be metaphysics, um, I can't speak as a sort of Heidegger expert or authoritatively, but what I think a barrier orientation on that is what Heidegger thinks is one, just stated dogmatically, somebody who hasn't really raised the Seinfrage is still metaphysical, but two, um, he gives several exacting issues where he can make the distinction, but frankly, I have to plead Leo Strauss's rule of 90%, 95% theoretical understanding is worse for an attempt to communicate than is just the French cafe version. So the French cafe version, I think we could give through Moliere. So supposing this French cafe version still isn't, it's like Newt Hampson languishing in Christiania before that which would become Oslo, before his potentialities reach fruition in some kind of, to perversely use the modern terms of the art world, emergence onto the scene. Can this idea of Nietzsche's, even in its French cafe version, its French version, reach a scene? Moliere, of course, it said, meaning to mock, that this Latin sort of schoolman way of talking of the virtue normativa as the answer to the question, why does this substance put the person to sleep? Why does this opium, why does opium make one want to go to the dorm room and sleep? And it's supposed to be funny because you say, what in this causes people to, what's the active ingredient in this? And then the answer is virtue normativa. Well, what's virtue normativa? It's the potential to make sleep. It's the power to make sleep. This opium has the power to make sleep. And then this is supposed to be funny because people say, oh, well, he's just flipping things around and playing games, or it's a tautology, or as though a tautology were a bad thing. This is a type of equation that expands the meaning and lets you do different things. It's not even a bad thing. But this whole discussion, the laughter over it, has exactly the same form, or pretty much exactly the same form as this joke when Norm Macdonald said, it's common among sort of middle-class Jews. It's a common attitude sort of to mock the idea of God. So Silver, the wife of Jimmy Kimmel, had made this mock, and then Norm Macdonald's answer to her is, yeah, but isn't that bad for you? You think that there's no God and it's ridiculous to talk about God, but isn't that something you have to suffer for? So the thing with the virtue normativa is the following. You have to have some name and some sort of bare thought on what's happening there. When Chomsky talks about it, he says, oh, you just put a title on it. But obviously, once you put the title on it, you're going to start collecting uh, experiences and envisagements about that subject matter. So now we have this notion of something that becomes, in the breakdown into materialism, the active ingredient. Why is it that this thing is sleep-inducing? And then you give a name to this. You say it has to do with a substance. You say there's a substance in there that causes it. So the old meaning of substance. So the thing that seems so ridiculous is also the very point of getting purchase on science at all. Just as if we sort of mock the idea of God and so on, say, what is it? What does it has to do with just us? So what is it? What's talking about God? But then you don't notice that you get a point of purchase there. You say now there's, for instance, there's the possibility of improvement. Now there's the possibility of the thought of Agathon or the good in Plato, and then the most improved state is the most perfect state, and then therefore the way one talks about God when one talks about a metaphysical God. But what's Nietzsche getting at? He's accepting the Cartesian picture, so insofar as he's saying, before we talked about these substances and the active ingredients, but now I'm going to tell you about Wilzermacht. Now I'm going to tell you about the will to power. And now if you take it that everyone, when we act, the ancient scheme is to say there's either impulses, lust, hunger, impulses, passions, or there are things done willfully, as though dumbly willfully, as it were, simply insisting on something. The way Trump was like the champion of that, simply insisting on things, willful, thumos. But dumbly, not because necessarily you're attracted to anything aesthetically or by way of natural inclination or by way of the so-called bios type loves, but neither for ideas, neither for the principle of the thing, neither for the logos. So I mean, historically we have this sort of simple three-part thing, just like we have like the idea of rule by one, rule by some, rule by all, things like that. A simple distinction applied to the subject matter of our own ethical composure, as it were. And then Nietzsche is seeing in this sort of a horror vacui of when you evacuate this out and then you try to say, no, there's just this one stuff, Daniel Dennett one stuff. Although, of course, Daniel Dennett is still in the archaic times because he's still trying to do this Cartesian thing with the Bewusstsein or consciousness, as it's now been interpreted. He still hasn't quite seen it straight out because he's still trying to figure out the hard problem of consciousness or whatever. But seen straight out, the way Nietzsche and Heidegger are dealing with it, what do we have? We have where there was ethical behavior, instead there's some explanation should be given in the terms of the Popperian sciences, or in terms of the Wertfreie Wissenschaft, which is a word in direct, the value-free sciences, the genuine neutrality, which is a word in direct connection to Nietzsche's own sort of, what he gave birth to, the dancing star he gave birth to, as it were. Of either doing things in this value-free way or doing things in this way that with the values, the Wert, which is the economic sort of way of looking at things. So where there was before logos, just willing in the sense of being, um, I guess like Kirk Douglas or something like that is another example that strikes me, being very willful. But not because it's about some idea necessarily. It always seems sort of like, that's why Kirk Douglas is sort of good at something like Spartacus, because it's like he doesn't have an idea in his head. But then when in the plot, sort of his sheer willfulness hits on the idea, then it seems impressive because he gives himself to it to hold it. The sheer willfulness, or biology. But now here's what one has to understand. Okay, so I've been going a while, but I'll just get to the actual idea here finally, so we have an avenue of invasion for the next time. Nietzsche doesn't accept what volition or all these sort of intermediate velleities or just bare wishes or all these different variations of being what it is to will something. And they're just our common sense, sort of like, will you do that? Yeah, I'll do it. And then sometimes willing implies sort of a bit of an effort. You're procrastinating, just do it. Will yourself to do it. Nietzsche doesn't simply accept any of the way will has been thought before, and nonetheless he puts it there because Descartes has cleared out this overall notion of the subjectivity, which would just be thrown murkily over all the categories of so-called daily life, which after all turn out to be different among the different Dasein because of the different cultures and because we learn more and more about that. And so then it becomes even more sort of this horror vacui situation. Becomes worse and worse. The nihilism rages more and more. And then he makes a very specific sense of what Mach means, not the sense he's as a classical scholar, as totally knowing, at least from the point of view of the West. He's not a big anthropologist like Dugin is, but nonetheless he knows from the point of view of the West what the will meant historically, what that concept was. He modifies it in a very special way when he proposes Wilsermacht, and one can see he's not talking about somebody, I'll just go this far ahead, he's not talking about somebody like Machiavelli or anything along those lines. He's just saying when these things all get wiped out, and then we're talking about what's actually happening. What's this impulse? What's actually happening here? This is where he starts, and of course he has been thinking about Schopenhauer, so he had it from he rejected the sense from this Kantian sort of artificial sense of that if you ask about the conditions of any possible experience while thinking about the primary and secondary qualities, or the two-table problem of Eddington, something like that, then you get a specific notion of the will in Schopenhauer. But Nietzsche's already looked at that, he looked at the whole tradition, and then he said, here's what I think is actually happening there. And he gives a sort of in this wave, these undulations, then you could see floating, as it were, gently, or maybe not gently, the main key concepts of Nietzsche.